Okay, we are currently recording. I want to point out that this meeting will be audio and video recorded. For legal purposes, everyone has to agree that to be audio and video recorded. Um, and now that way you guys know. So now we can start our meeting. So you take it away, guys.
Start the meeting and just call out that this is the Powers Creek Landowner Community Meeting, November 2nd, 2024, being held at the Skinner Store in Blue Lake, California. We're also joined on Zoom. And Terry, I'm going to butcher your last name, Klausterman. Is that correct? Oh,
That's just fine. Thank you.
okay. And Terry is our grant manager from the Department of Water Resources joining us. And just to let everyone know in the room, including Terry for sure, and those of us who just joined us, we did have a beginning part of this, which was an introduction orientation. We had a second part of this meeting, which was a field tour of the location to eventually be restored. And now the third phase of this meeting is this part, which will be our presentation with our engineers, our hydrologists, and oh, we also have Steph and Alan. Hi, Stefan. We'll have to inform Stefan of the public meeting and recording. So he came in, he's another board member for bottle questions. So that said, I'm going to turn it over to our planner and our engineers to begin the PowerPoint.
Good afternoon. I'm Rose Patnott. I work with Northern Hydrology and Engineering. I'm a senior water resource engineer, and I'm working on the modeling and design of the Powers Creek Fish Habitat Restoration Project. At this point, we are at a 30% design revision. Not a design revision for you, Carrie, but a design revision from the previous set of designs that were done by Greenway Associates in the city of Blue Lake. So, just a little background. This was put together from a previous project presentation. I thought I would keep it just because it kind of tied into what it is that we're presenting. This is Lower Powers Creek aerial photo from 1941. The blue line is the 1941 channel alignment. The red line is the present channel alignment. You can see that the channel had many more meanders than it ended up with after the mill pond was put in the late 40s, early 50s. Here is a overview from Schuster from 1947. This photo was taken the day after a little bit over a half an inch of rain fell per Woodley Islands records. You can see that the Blue Lake is inundated. You can barely see my writing, but I can at least sort of point it out to you while I'm here, up here on the screen. Blue Lake is what is considered this backwater area. You guys know east of Hatchery Road. This is Hatchery Road right here. This is Applewood Lane. You guys are very familiar with Applewood Lane for the landowners that are here. Here's the channel coming down through there. You can see that Railroad Avenue is not built yet. So the road that goes across is just a little footbridge at this point. There's no houses along the right bank downstream of the culvert. The whole area there is a wide open floodway or a channel for Powers Creek to come through into this wooded area where, as you saw from the blue line and the red line previously, there were these meanders that went around and through. You can see that right here, there's this little backwater channel here, meander kind of coming around. The channel had some complexity. Here's where this future log pond was built. And you can see that Powers Creek has been straightened, at least in this portion here. And then the log pond itself is just sort of draining into the channel here. Just to kind of orient yourselves with how the channel might have looked historically, even after there was a lot of settlement here. I even found a picture of a baptism in Powers Creek where people were up to here and, you know, some pool along the channel. But I thought I'd save that for some other time. Of course. And And this right here is Applewood Lane, just so you can kind of see that little hook right there is Applewood Lane.
Oh, Extension drive.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah, the creek had a lot more meanders than it does right now. Right now, it's got kind of a straightened channel. Yeah. Okay. So here's a picture again from a another set of slides. This is after the 1947 photos. I'm guessing this is like 50 to 53, I think, is when Brewster went through and took another series of photos here. The log pond is built. You can see how the channel is straightened. And then I brought up this picture because I think it's interesting to see how they then denuded the creek upstream and really sort of reamed out this backwater channel. It's very much in its same location as it is now, and it looks very much the same as it did. And then here is Powers Creek, kind of backing up into um, its culvert. But I think it's important to kind of look at the evolution of the creek over time, what it used to look like, what it looks like now. You can see that there were large cottonwoods, conifer that were there before that have been removed. So the slide says in the late 1940s, Lower Powers Creek was realigned, channelized, and stripped of vegetation to make way for the Macintosh Mill. It has been in this degraded condition since and has greatly filled in with non-native invasive species. And I think that that's how, you can see some of the creek at least now. So in 2021, I think, the Blue Lake Rancheria with a tribal wildlife grant from the Fish and Wildlife Service, they restored Powers Creek and they replaced a bridge on Gary Johnson's property. Within doing that, there was a concrete sill underneath the bridge that perched the creek, I think at least with a drop pool that was, I think it was like 6 feet deep. It was huge. It was huge. And it had a huge scour hole, and fish couldn't get up past this bridge. They broke out the concrete as part of this project. They designed a bridge and set it up onto some engineered abutments. And then they did some restoration downstream that looks a lot like this when it was built. They put in meanders and basically tried to open up the stream and an inset floodplain to allow for water to sort sediment and move out into the river. What the river is directly downstream of this.
Just a very quick note, before the bridge was put in, which was a project that
Is your mic on?
it's on, yes, which was a project that I implemented, Don and I, when we were at RCIA. Before that bridge was put in, there were a double culvert there. And the double culvert also had a big drop below it that was a barrier. And we, without engineers involved and cross sections and longitudinal profiles, thought, oh, we'll just replace those culverts with a bridge. And the owner of the property had a bridge they wanted to donate. It was Bob King. And so Bob donated that bridge. That's what we had. So we put the bridge in, not knowing really what we were doing. I was a young man at the time. And like I said, we didn't have the benefit of a lot of good engineering. But it was one of the very first projects we did on Powers Creek. And we thought it was going to help with passage. But hopefully, as you showed here, it still was not wide enough. And it still created that plunge off the end of it. But just to add a little bit of history to that project there.
Okay.
Bruce, just as the facilitator of the meeting, are you good with
Sorry.
going along with comments and questions as you go intermittently, or do you want to get that to the end?
This is fine
This
for
is
me.
fine.
I mean,
Okay.
as long as
I just want to
everybody's
make sure that it
okay.
works best for
If they
you.
need more
And we
content,
have,
can
yeah,
say no more
and we have
questions.
plenty of time. We have plenty of time, so that's good. Okay.
Yes.
Great question. Did you design this section?
No, I did not. I did not.
But we were all SHM.
SHN was involved. Yeah.
Was the team on that one?
I think that Gary Hufford designed it. Greg Hufford designed. Yeah. And Lisa. Yeah. Jeff, do you want to use a microphone? Okay.
This shows how.
Yeah. And this is a really good picture to show the channel in the inset floodplain. So you can see that the channel here, this is a low flow channel. Here is a bar, and here is an inset floodplain before it goes up into the active, flooding floodplain. Restricted on the side here by landowner, which they put in some riprap here to protect.
And it's been through a couple of heavy flow winters and it's retained its shape pretty much. I was just there the other day.
Immediately after like the planting.
Yeah.
So nothing, I think that was, I mean.
Mhm.
To the mics, guys.
Mine's on.
Mic into the mic. All right.
You just have-
So, project goals and objectives. The goals of this project to restore salmon and riparian habitats in Lower Powers Creek and increase the abundance of coho salmon and steelhead populations in the Mad River. In addition, this project will benefit flood reduction. That is one of the goals. Okay. So the objectives are to improve channel morphology in Lower Powers Creek, create and enhance coho salmon and steelhead habitats, and establish a multi-story native species riparian corridor. The businesses and agencies shown below are the folks that are involved. So you guys know where you're at. Here is an overview of the 30% design revision. I put the parcel lines on this so that you guys can kind of see your land relative to this project in terms of a initial grading footprint. Again, this is a first cut. Our first cut, the goal initially is to just see, can we, lower flood reduction, because we'll come back and put in the microtopography for fisheries habitat as we move forward in the project. There's no sense in doing that until we can actually see how the channel is going to be moving water. So that's our first cut, is just looking at how much water can we get into that low flow channel, and then how much is going to sit up on, the inset floodplains, and then the channel itself. What's the capacity of the channel itself? So that is what this design is right here. The purpose of this design was to go through and do some hydraulic modeling and look at how the channel itself could be changed to benefit, flood reduction. And that's what I'm going to present here, because that's where we're at right now in the project. Yes.
So the color represents water?
The color represents contours or elevations. So the green and the blue downstream here is the lowest elevation. Okay. And as we're coming up, this is higher elevation, this being the highest elevation here, and up along, where it meets into the floodplain, which we call the daylighting into the ground, where we meet where the ground is at. And again, like, this is just a cut. What we have now is a step forward with the constraints that are brought forward from SHN to us. That is, hey, you can't go past this line. And so we have to go and adjust our channel and our design to wherever the constraints, pin us within this footprint. Okay.
And you've got the choke point here, that's the equestrian bridge. At the bottom.
That is the footbridge right there.
Okay,
on
now
the
I'm
way.
seeing several hands up, so I'm going to call people now so people get turns.
Mhm.
Linda was next.
Um, so I was just wondering if you could point out where the new bridge is. It was in
Gary Johnson's
Gary
bridge.
Johnson's bridge, yeah.
Yes, it's at the downstream end of the project. That's where we're starting from.
Okay,
We're starting
thanks.
from just at the end of where the project that was done initially in 2021, and then we're working our way upstream. And the idea is that we're bringing it from that point upstream so that we can, improve habitat throughout this whole reach.
And
Thank
Karina,
you.
you had your hand up.
So, does that mean that someone will be monitoring the creek flow this winter and using those access that you cut to go in there? How are you going to measure that? How does that happen? Because you want to know what the creek as it stands right now, what its capacity is. Do you already have that
No,
information?
that's not our goal. Our goal is not to look at we know somewhat what the creek capacity is, looking at some of the flood events. We don't need to nail down what a low flow channel looks like in the creek. The creek itself is pretty much holding low flow right now. What we want to do is we want to increase the capacity of the creek.
Right.
We are designing a low flow channel based on the size of the substrate that it passes through the channel and the velocities that are going to be moving through the system.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we went through and we, did what we call a pebble count, where you go through and you measure, the surface substrate within the channel. And we use that as a surrogate to try to say, okay, how wide, how deep will it take to be passing this sediment through this channel?
Mike,
And
Mike.
maybe the terms of knowing the flow. So we have like a footprint of the watershed, like the size of the area, and then we look at what the rainfall or what event is that gives us the amount of water. And the reason why we needed more cross sections and survey data gives us a better understanding of the existing geometry of the channel, because it's that cross sectional area and the amount of water, and that's how we come up with that flow and volume. And
Yeah.
that's basically what Rose is creating a model. And then so we have what's called existing conditions, and that's why she modeled like where this event went. And then when she changes the shape of that, that's through this modeling process, they can figure out, okay, what will this new design convey? So it's really important to have a good understanding of existing conditions. That's why we did this additional survey work. And then she ties that into what do we want to do?
Right. And so I guess what I was getting at is like you called it a high rain intensity event, like what happened this last winter. We had a pretty the most significant flood event for Powers Creek in where I lived, right down there by the bridge, in at least 40 years, as far as going back for anybody that I talked to that knew about what was happening here. And so I guess what I'm going at is like we're looking at like extreme weather mitigation, you know. So I'm wondering how you take that into account when you're
I'll get to that.
okay. Good.
Okay, I will. I will get to
Okay,
that.
good.
Thank you for clarifying your question. I didn't get it the first time. Thank you, Mike. All right. So, okay, a couple of features. We're very constricted within a lot of, the channel, especially, within this footprint here. You can see that we've crossed over into the city's trail for a portion of this, hopping back into moving onto the city's property where they have, a historical landfill here, and then coming out into Gary Johnson's property um, to realign the channel out into an area where we can create habitat. Okay, so here's the existing alignment is this blue line. I don't know if you can see it against the aerial photograph. But here is an area where we can have a high flow channel remain. So the grading isn't necessary through here. We can leave this channel in place, and then we can swing this channel deeper and then tie back into it up here so that we have more fisheries habitat, more wildlife habitat um, within this corridor here. Within the design, which you can't see at the scale, is the channel itself, which is, let's say, about 20 feet, and then like an inset floodplain that's like 8 to 10 feet on either side of the channel that may alternate from side to side of the channel, depending upon if we're on a meander or not. Okay. Here as well is where the city is moving back their levee to be able to accommodate a meander here. This is where we saw that they dredged in that these two different channels in the 50s to accommodate this large log pond here. And in here, we're tying into that channel a little bit further upstream, and we're cutting down uh, the um, the large mound of dirt that separates those two channels to make it part of the system, and make it part of the inset floodplain, so the channel itself has more capacity within its walls. Okay. Um, this is the piece of property that we started at. We walked around. We could see that there's a very, very, very tight constriction as this is coming out of this culvert here. Here, within this design, we are opening up the floodplain here to provide a release, essentially, of flood flows out onto a floodplain, out onto an inset floodplain. Okay? Yes.
Will that area also be like a backwater area, habitat area?
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah. And as it is lower, it's maintaining being lower as well. We're not going to raise it. We're not going to make Powers Creek so much lower than it. It will continue being a backwater channel and still drain back into the pasture on the east side of Hatchery Road. Yeah, if anything, it might be a little bit more active. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions before I move past this slide? I know this is a very important slide, because it has like a layout and the parcels on it. Um, and again, this is just a first cut, just so that you guys understand that the 30% design is a grading plan but it's not the grading plan that's going to move forward into implementation. Okay. So looking at existing ground digital elevation. Okay, we talked about how the LiDAR is pretty good outside of the riparian and that like it had some really good points, you know, down the center of the channel that it was able to catch that was consistent with the survey points that were taken at the same time, taken within the same year. Then we take that information that we had at the time. Again, this is before we came out and we did more surveys within the last month. We did have in 2022, we did have a series of cross sections that SHN had initially gone out and measured. And in order to improve the LiDAR information, I took those cross sections and I stitched them together. And you can do that through the model. And you get like, you know, the best information that you have with what you have. And so instead of having a point that's way out in the floodplain and a point that's in a channel, which is going to create a triangular channel that looks like this, we can take those cross sections and we can give it bed and bank. And so this isn't an exact replica of what the system looks like, but it is based on topographic data. It does help with this type of modeling. What we're going to do at this point with this existing ground digital elevation model is we're going to take the rest of those cross sections, which is at least twice as many, and we're going to improve this model with the new cross sections to give us a better idea of what the system looks like so that we can design to that and create a construction plan. Okay. This is our design based on that digital elevation model. So you can see how within this design, again, this is all taken from my hydraulic model, so I don't have all of the parcel map, the parcel, and this is based on, you know, topography and on aerial photographs. So it's a little bit harder to kind of orient yourself. But I could probably give you guys a couple points. This is that turn at Gary Johnson's. This is that channel that remains. You can see how much deeper the new channel is. Okay, how much wider the footprint of the new channel is. Okay. This isn't perfect. It's got some funky stuff going on here where there's some sort of triangulation. Again, we don't want to spend a ton of time sitting there and fixing topography when we're really just trying to get like a cut of whether or not like, hey, can this move water from this culvert out into, you know, Gary Johnson's bridge, which is right here. Okay. So here is the channel. It's pretty uniform. It has doesn't look like it's showing the bottom of the picture, but the backwater channel comes out here. That's okay. And it does have restoration was down there, and you can see the topography there as it was designed. So with that, we try to calibrate this model to the 100-year events that happen both in the Mad River and in Powers Creek, which are two different events. And that I'm going to really kind of bring to you guys' attention is that when the Mad River floods, right, it's coming from the Mad River and it's backwatering up Powers Creek. So we run a model where Powers Creek is having a regular storm event, just a normal old storm event, and the Mad River is just peaking. And so the Mad River comes and floods back into Powers Creek as it's peaking. Okay. And this is the 100-year footprint. And this matches very, very well with the FEMA flood map. Right here is a 73-foot contour. That's their 73. This is my 73-foot contour. This is FEMA's 73-foot contour. This is FEMA's 74-foot contour. This is my 74-foot contour. It starts to break up as we go up the channel, as you would expect. But in the Mad River, we're representing the way that the Mad River floods very, very well. Okay. And then we go and we look at Powers Creek. So this is the Mad River having a normal flood event. Okay. And Powers Creek cheeking like crazy. Okay. And this is the 100-year footprint for Powers Creek. Okay. And some of the things where there is variation, which I think is very important, like here's the 75-foot contour, that's the 75-foot contour. Here's the 78-foot contour, that's the 78-foot contour. But as we get upstream, it starts to kind of pull away a little bit more, and we're showing a bit more flooding, which you would expect because their 100-year event is based on a channel that was surveyed in probably the 80s. And so we are looking at the channel as it is right now, or maybe with the LiDAR in 2011, and that the channel itself is a grading. Okay. So there is a little bit more of a peak in our, but not by like a lot, in our model as we go upstream. But again, what FEMA does is that they take their models and they say, okay, here's the Mad River flooding up to this level, here's Powers Creek flooding up to this level, and they put them together and they say, this is your FEMA flood map. So that's what we're doing is we're saying, okay, can we mimic this? Can we create the same sort of system that's being shown in the FEMA flood map for a 100-year event so that we know that we're at least talking apples to apples about extreme flooding within this floodplain. And as you can see that there's tons of high flood pathways across the floodplain, which you would expect in a floodplain. You know, people build in floodplains. They're really, really nice places to live. But you can see how a 100-year event, much of this area is underwater, which is, of course, a very extreme event, right? It's your 1955, 1964 events. Yes.
So it looks like there's some islands there in a
Yes.
100-year event. And is that where the existing houses are there now, or?
There are some islands, and I would say that the islands could be trees because of LIDAR. Again, you have to take this as it is. What we're trying to get is we're trying to get the flow through the channel. We cannot account for irregularities that are out on the floodplain. This is not a FEMA flood map. This is not trying to reproduce or create a FEMA flood map. What we're trying to do is we're trying to match up as well as we can with the hydraulics of the channel. And that's it. Okay. So we're not trying to say like, hey, this is actually what it looks like at the topography of the floodplain, because we know that those high points could be trees. It could be blackberry bushes. The important part is, is the slope, the channel water correct? That's what we're really getting to is that do we have the correct elevation and slope of the channel water as it's coming upstream? Okay. So this, of course, is an extreme event. This is how we calibrated the model initially. This is how we looked at the hydraulics within the system, and we could see that, yeah, this area floods quite well in a 100-year event. And then we look at the existing conditions for a 2-year event. This is more of an in-channel event. This is the type of storm event that we would call bank full by some people. Maybe a 1.5-year event would be bank full. And you would expect for the channel, the active channel that you want to be able to move water through a system fills up and gets right up to the edge of it. Okay. And here that comes here, it comes up to Gary Johnson's pasture here. This is, of course, based on existing conditions, topography. Okay. This could or could not be true. This could be just from a numerical error in having the mesh that I'm modeling to be too large across this system right here where it's bringing water across. However, you can see that Charton Road is activated. In existing conditions, Charton Road is spilling out pretty regularly. And that's something that we have seen. If you were to look at the depth of the water, it might be really, really shallow. Okay. And then there's places that are darker that show the deeper. I think that this is that stormwater channel that goes through your guys' property. And we'd expect for that to be deeper, right? It's a channel in itself. This is a high flow path that's coming across the channel. And you can also see that the road is barring it. It doesn't really just cross like it would up here if this was activated, right? But that being much more shallow. So with the design, the idea is to keep this within the channel. So a 2-year event, an event that's happening every single year, or every other year, I should say, right, is filling up and then just overtopping your inset floodplains. So just coming up and staying within the bottom of the channel. Okay, that's the intent. So the intent is to deepen the channel throughout its whole reach so that water can come up through the channel and stay within the channel so that it's not coming out of channel every other year. Okay.
Rose,
Yes.
just to be clear, it doesn't mean that water from rain itself might not fill in some low areas out in the Charton Road area.
No.
That might still happen,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't be the overflow from Powers Creek coming down Charton Road filling them in.
Yes.
That's the difference.
Water rains and puddles from precipitation.
Yep.
For a 2-year event.
Right.
For,
For a
yeah,
2-year
for a 2-year event or a high intensity
Yeah,
event, right? I mean,
right.
we talked about high intensity versus
Right,
duration.
'cause that's somewhere in between those two. That's where that's the little gray area. So
Yeah.
100-year and every year, which is what we had last year, which was
Yes.
because there were several infrastructure.
Yes. And you can also have
Yeah.
a high intensity storm that happens this time of year where the ground is super dry and open and ready to just fill up. Or you can have it in January where where the ground's completely saturated and it's ready to run off. And so you have, so many different scenarios with the same, currents, let's say. Whereas the idea here is that this is the flood that happens every other year. This is the extreme flood of the year. Okay. Okay, so this is looking at a 5-year event. Okay, so a 5-year event, we have more water, of course. Water is, coming out of Charton Road pretty significantly. It's moving across the floodplain, and so this is about the capacity of the channel at Charton Road. Okay, so this is at Charton Road. So you can see that our high flow channel is activated right here. Water is coming back up into this area here. This, I would say, is not necessarily true because this is, I think, due to numerical error. And I'll show this to you because you can see that within this design, there's no connection between the water that's happening here and the water that's here. There's no connection. It's not actually coming out there. This is due to numerical error. So this is like I could go through and I could, put down the mesh of my model much smaller and make this not happen. And again, I'm not going to spend the time to do that at this point in the design because it's just a waste of time. But we have to be able to see it for what it is. That this is, the capacity at Charton Road. And I'll move to the next slide, which will show you guys a cross section there, that we can see that this green line being the topography of our design and the red line being the existing topography. During a 5-year event, that big blue line is coming over the top of Charton Road right here. This cross section's at Charton Road. And that our design, where we pull it open, we put in this large open channel, we're still within the capacity of the channel here. Okay. So again, is it a 4.95-year event? Is it a 5.05? This is the hydrology voodoo that, this isn't going to be exactly at a 5-year event at this flow that I estimated, but this is a, huge improvement within the system that we're dropping the water right below the culvert, at least like about a foot. So within a 5-year event. Okay. So just want to bring this guy to you guys' attention when I'm saying this is a numerical error. It just means that what I'm estimating here is being picked up over here as the same elevation. Okay, even though there's not that connection.
Well, I'm wondering about that slide before.
Yep.
So is that an actual visual of water at a 5-year sort of, I don't know what you want to call that. That's just a model.
This is just a model. Yeah, this is just a model that is calibrated to a 100-year event at this point. Okay, and this will be improved as we put in more information into the existing ground topography with the cross sections that were just collected.
Because I think it's important to note, and I don't know if this is. Sorry. It looks like that area there that you're talking about, Charton Road.
Mhm.
There's a lot of drainage problems that don't have to do with Powers Creek. So if there is water standing, it's in that gymkhana, that horse arena,
Yes.
and that is technically that's supposed to be the drainage
Yeah.
for that area. But the water I've been documenting, I've been videographing it, especially since it flooded last year, and the water that we have serious drainage problems there. So if there's, I was just wondering if that's actually an aerial of how you're modeling that, because water is accumulating there and it doesn't have to do with Powers Creek. It's just water that doesn't have anywhere to go that's coming down the streets.
I'm going to be very, very, very straightforward. Okay. The modeling that I'm doing is for this restoration project.
Right.
This is not for trying to figure out stormwater in
Yeah.
Blue Lake. So I do want to be very, very clear about that.
And I wasn't asking
Okay,
for
because
that.
I don't
just
have
wanna
that
make
level of
sure.
information.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that you know that if you see water or you know that there's flooding that's happening that doesn't have to do with Powers Creek there, so that's not part of.
Well,
That's
no,
not a solution that can be
not
would
necessarily.
impact that.
when we went and we put together this model and we were, calibrating it, we can only calibrate to the information that we have, right? So when I went out to Kit and Rebecca's house and I was able to go and survey their high water mark from this last year's event and go over and survey the points from their photographs of what was dry and what was wet, it gives me a better idea of, okay, this is what I would expect to see in my model at this location. And, it will improve the model.
Right.
Is it going to improve the model everywhere? No,
That's what I'm
because
just
it's only
wondering.
your model's only as good as your topography.
Right.
I mean, really.
And I wonder how you can quantify if the creek is overflowing and impacting properties
Mm-hmm.
further away, not bordering the creek. And that's compounded by drainage problems there. It's a combination of things there.
Yes.
And nobody's reached out to me about that, to say, well, what happened here? Because in a sense, it is part um, of that flood, of the
Yes.
flooding of the creek, but it isn't only because of that. It's a compounded thing.
Yeah, and like Mike was saying, like there was a culvert that broke up on the county road, which
Right.
compounded the flooding here, which is
Right.
not in Powers Creek, but we're seeing, out on the floodplain, and we're saying, oh, but look at it flooded over here. Okay, it's not necessarily having to do with this system; it's having to do with another system that's
Right.
entering here. I think that all of the information that all of the landowners have about the flooding should be documented, and it should be written down. It should be, given to your flood administrator, which is the city, so that they have a record. Because if this were to go forward
Right.
with FEMA or with any other entity that could help the city move forward on the
Yeah.
issue on a citywide level, all of that information is going to be so golden for the person who is working on the project, because then they have the information to be able to calibrate to.
I was told I was on my own.
Okay.
I got no help.
Okay.
I'm just for the record.
All right.
I asked for help with mitigation strategies.
Well, I mean,
Nothing.
there's not a lot that
So-
in terms of mitigation. I mean, again, I'll let Mike speak to this because this is way outside of
Yeah.
my world. Is that there isn't a plan in place right now. There was no, you had said that there was no uh, county hazard that was, declared. And without things like that, like there isn't a system to really be working in. However, I'm saying that if a system were to move forward at that point, the information that you have is very valuable to me as a
Good.
hydrologist.
So that's the connection I'm trying
Yeah.
to make.
Yeah.
Is this part of that bigger kind of looking at all of these? Because I've been doing that on my own, talking with Caltrans and the county and the city, and everybody has just pushed along to somebody else. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why aren't you guys working together? I mean, how I have you to work together?
Yeah.
This is impacting people downstream.
Yeah.
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 And for instance, the county has already been aware of this, what I call School Creek, which comes out behind the Patriot gas station, goes along the school. It actually enters the Mad River on its own, but because it's an undersized culvert system, the January 13th event really drove home that it is undersized. And so the county is aware of that, Public Works, but we have no money to do anything about it. And because that was just a local little flooding situation, it wasn't declared as a disaster, county or state or federal. So there was no funding made available to do anything with that. That's why we put Measure O on the ballot in November for Tuesday to try and get money for our county roads. And that's the kind of source of funding we need to be able to start dealing with these undersized culverts that are compounding what's going on here. It's not Powers Creek. This is School Creek coming out of its banks, and it literally flooded the road. So you couldn't even get to the gas station at the Rancheria and stuff for a while, right?
So we'll talk more about how to
Yes,
move that along.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, we need to move into moving forward. I'm sorry, I think we here, and I don't want to say that that's not important, but I think we need to move it to the next part of the slide.
Oh,
So
wait.
we got one more for Rose, and then we go back. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Because I'm going to probably pass off the torch at this point. So I want to make sure there's no other questions.
Just wanted to real quick point out that it's not just water coming over the bank, but during saturated conditions, water comes up as well on the other side of levees or berms because the groundwater starts rising up because of saturation. So we talk about that in sea level rise. Will the levees around the bay hold it back? Well, even if it does, you can still have water on the other side of the levees coming up from groundwater saturated and stuff. So it can happen in two ways.
Water is where all ours conversation about it seems. So I took these photos just last week. This is what we used to call the hole in the Hammond in the Widow White Creek area near McKinleyville, California. And I remember in 2002, I walked into this guy's office and he said, "Why don't you come down to Widow White Creek?" And he handed me a chainsaw, and we cut all these trees down to the ground so that a good friend of ours, Matt Smith, could do some excavation work there and dig out the channel. And then we put in large wood that was attached to boulders, which was the foundation for the foot trail that goes through that spot right there. And I just wanted us to keep, as I said earlier, our eyes on the long-term goal, which is leaving our legacy behind for the community that comes after us, because um, we obviously need to work together to get to the place where large trees are shading out the Himalayan blackberry and we have a system that's functioning better. And that's what these meetings are about. So next part of this is talking about the planning and the permitting process. So let's hand it over to Gary.
Thank you, Rose. Great
Thank you, Rose. Yeah.
So for folks who weren't here at the beginning of the meeting, I'm Gary Reese. I work as a principal planner at SHN. I'm also the consulting city planner to the city of Blue Lake. And I'm helping with the permitting and environmental review for this project. And SHN is doing a variety of other things as well, including the grading, revegetation plan, another number of other things for the project. So as far as the project status, we've already kind of discussed some of this out in the field. So some of you may already know, but so this project was funded by Department of Water Resources. It's currently a planning grant for doing design, permitting, and environmental review. Right now, we're working on updating the design to address comments we got from CDFW and NOAA Fisheries on the initial project design. And we have a timeline where we have to complete the design, permitting, and environmental review by June of 2025. And after that, after we complete this grant, the next step would be to seek implementation funding for construction of the project. Is there anything you guys want to add about project status or no?
I just wanted to mention, um, so California Department of Water Resources is a big agency. They specifically have an urban streams restoration program, and it's designed to help communities, urban communities, with their flooding issues while also enhancing habitat. So it's the Urban Streams Restoration Program within the Department of Water Resources that's funding this.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
So as far as permitting requirements, these kind of riparian restoration projects require permits from a variety of agencies at the local, state, and federal level. And those agencies that we need permits from are listed here, starting with the city itself. There is a conditional use permit that's needed. California Department of Fish and Wildlife, they have a permit. North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, and then the Army Corps of Engineers. And I'll get into kind of the submittal status as I go through the next slide. As far as the local permits, I noted conditional use permit. That application was submitted in spring of 2022. And we've done a little bit of work on a CEQA document, but once SHN started assisting with this project, we pivoted for CEQA purposes to the statutory exemption for restoration projects. And I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. Ultimately, to complete the CEQA process and to take this to the Planning Commission for a conditional use permit, we'll need the information in the 65% design, which is expected to be available in January of 2025. Also from the city, besides a conditional use permit, anytime you're modifying, the floodplain or a creek channel like this, you need a flood development permit from the city. And that would be issued by the floodplain administrator, who's the city manager, and should obviously work with their staff, public works, and city engineer to assist in that review. And then needing a grading permit from the building department as well. So as far as CEQA compliance, like I noted, we initially started with an initial study for CEQA purposes, but then pivoted to the statutory exemption for restoration projects. And we have some of this presentation is from our presentation to the CDFW team that reviews those applications for SERP. And there was maybe 10 or 11 of them, folks from the funding side, the regulatory side, and we presented this project, and they concurred. They believe that SERP, would be appropriate for this project, and it could meet the criteria. So if we weren't able to do this or some other exemption, we'd have to go through a full CEQA process, but they created this exemption specifically for these type of projects because, they believe long term it has a limited impact on the environment and is something that's appropriate to exempt. As far as state federal permitting, we have, as I noted, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And the permit that's needed from them is what's called a lake and stream bed alteration agreement. Anytime you're modifying the bed, bank, or channel of a stream, you have to get one of these permits. So there was an application submitted in April of 2022, and within a month, they have 30 days to do their completeness review. We got an incomplete letter, and essentially the 65% design information is what it's needed to respond and complete that. Some of the things they asked for, I think there was a question early on, what were they asking for? So they asked for revisions to the basis of design reports. They wanted a detailed revegetation plan. They said they're not going to be able to issue their permit until they see the 90% design. They wanted more grading specifications, an erosion control plan, and for the spoils disposal sites to be specifically identified. So that was put into an incomplete letter. Also, it notes under the Army Corps that NOAA Fisheries had a number of comments. The comments were very similar from both agencies. So the other permit we need is from the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board because the project will impact waters of the state, which is basically from ordinary high water mark up, into the bank. We would need this Section 401 water quality certification under the Clean Water Act. And there's not been an application submitted for that. And one of the reasons is we already know that there's additional information that's needed. So instead of submitting and getting an incomplete letter, we'd rather wait till we have the 65% design information and, it can move more smoothly through the process. And then we have the Regional General Permit 12 through the Army Corps, which is specific to fisheries restoration grant programs. And that was also submitted in April of 2022. And they consult with NOAA Fisheries when reviewing these type of permits under Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act. So NOAA had a number of comments. I know there was a lot of back and forth with them. Basically, their comments ended up in the CDFW incomplete letter, which was kind of interesting. But anyway, so when we have the 60%, 65% design info, we'll be able to respond and complete, these applications, and then obviously submit to the water board as well. So that concludes our presentation as far as I know. So
I think at this point, we wanted to jump into, so immediately, if there's any immediate questions for Gary, I'm going to give that like 10 minutes. And then I have a letter here from Kitman and Rebecca, is it Ziegler? Zettler.
Yeah.
And we want to go through that letter. And when we're reading that letter, our team has reviewed it in our team meeting, Mike, myself, Don Allen. I'm sure Gary is aware of some of it. So we'll field some of the answers to that. And some of the answers to that we just don't have answers to. So we'll just say no answer at this time, looking for funding, or no answer at this time, we are not implementing at this time. But the things we can answer, we will. So if you have immediate questions for Gary, let's give it 10, 15 minutes to deal with those questions, and then we're going to go into the letter. Yeah.
Lynn,
Can we get a copy of the grant?
what do you mean by that? The
Application.
the application. Do you guys have that, Dave? Or?
A copy of the grant agreement?
The grant
Application.
Use of budget or was not funded?
It was funded. It was Department of Water Resources.
Yeah.
Provided funding.
Yeah.
So you want the application?
Copy of the grant that was funded, which I. Or the agreement.
Yeah, we had to amend the original agreement. So
I think Lynn's asking for the application.
The grant proposal, maybe, what they proposed to do.
Which is in the application.
As long as that was funded, that was not.
It was funded.
I could give you the most updated amended agreement that we have between Department of Water Resources, which defines the project we're working on currently. Because the proposal was different than what we're doing now. We had to chop out the implementation and go straight to planning because of the time window shrank.
Right, so the agreement with you.
Yeah, okay.
That's right.
I can get you that. Yeah. And I think I have your email, so I can just send you a copy of it. Yeah. Okay. Karina?
So now the grant money is going toward planning rather than implementation, is that?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So
Because we were promised after the flood that they were gonna get in there this year and start working on
Well-
some of the, and then they said, oh,
Okay.
and then I found out, oh, that's
I
not
I
happening.
don't know who promised that, but I didn't promise that. I don't.
It's the city.
Yeah. Okay.
No, well, at the time, this before they redid our agreement. So initially we had construction funds for a section of that. But when we were updating our agreement and our deadline was held tight. And part of that was the city engineer. So let's back up this 2022. We were not involved. We were reviewing. Um, the design team that was involved with that, their engineer retired. And one of the requirements was that plans had to be stamped by an engineer. Okay, so they didn't have the ability, the people that originally worked on that.
Yeah. So it's
So it took a long time to secure. They, the Ottawa Watershed Council reached out to a lot of folks. So, people are busy right now. And so there was no one that could really help on this project. They're going to lose funding. They approached the city agreed. And then it took time for then the funding agency to concur that as city engineer, city planner, we could work on this without going out to bid because the city goes through a competitive bid process for us to be like every 3 years they put this out to bid. So that process finally got approved. So the funding that I had at the time, Karina, that we were going to go to construction, but all the agreements when we were working with the agency didn't get finalized until recently.
Yeah, it's a very arduous process. So you weren't here when we began the meeting, but I'm going to go real quickly through the history of it. We began the process in 2012 with a California Department of Fish and Wildlife grant to do the planning up to 65%. When it got through review, it ended up being, oh, that's not enough. So we were more at 30%. Then our engineer retired that could have stamped those plans. And we were stuck at a place where we had to look for a new group of people who could do it. And that's the team who's here. Unfortunately, time went on as agreements have to be reviewed through the agency. It took a lot longer than we had anticipated. And the agency, in their wisdom, actually said, you don't have enough time to implement right now. So we're going to give you an opportunity to get the plan done by June 2025. And here's the funding. And they actually allowed us to review all of the funding that was in the initial budget and reallocate it because prices change between 2022 and 2024. So we were able to adjust the budget and accommodate the needs of our partners here with SHN and Northern Hydrology and the other folks who are involved. And we were very fortunate to find that worked for us and it worked for the agency. And Department of Water Resources has been incredibly generous to allow us that opportunity because other agencies might have canceled the contract and our organization would have failed. So it's been a lot of hard work to get to this point, and our goal now has been readjusted. So our goal is to resubmit once we get our permits and we get all of the DWR approval in the spring of 2025 for funds for implementation. And that means we won't even get notice until the fall of 2025, whether we have those funds or not. And then we'll be able to implement in 2026. So we're 2 years away.
Right.
And that's unfortunate, but it's the processes that protect the public that allow everyone to be safe and go forward together that slow it down. And that's the challenge of all of this.
And that's optimistic too, because you know it depends on funding cycles. When they come out, there's only a few funding programs that might fund a project like this. So, matching up the right funding program and the timing once we have the designs and the CEQA, what Dave said was optimistic. Like that's the soonest it could possibly be.
So that was a lot of information. Thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot. Yeah.
But the original question is, so that funding to begin implementation now is being used for planning. for redoing the
to
planning.
complete the job.
And then now you're saying, well, we don't know, well, then we'll have the money to actually implement. That could take even longer. So
Yeah.
the scope is greatly expanded.
Yeah, we had to, due to the reviews by some of the agencies, we had to expand the length of the reach. We had to expand the view and the modeling. So that all takes time and energy, and that's why people were on the ground in September doing surveys so we could get better information to better model.
And I,
As a community member, one of the ways, well, maybe this isn't the time to answer that, but I'm just going to put that out there, that we can be instrumental in getting that funding for implementation and at least moving that along, because this is going to take time. And then we need to have the funding. I'd like to work with us, other community members. I'd like to work with you to help.
So letters of support are helpful. And we have the team that is going to be able to put together the grant proposal through the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's FRGP program, which is the Fishery Restoration Program, and or Department of Water Resources if the measure, which one is it? I think it's 5.
Yeah, just climate change.
Climate
policy.
change
Yeah.
funds for climate change come in.
Measure,
So it's dependent on funding. Oh, Carrie has something to say.
oh, it's measure 4. It's on the
Measure
back.
4. Thank you.
We said 3 or 5.
We were putting numbers out.
a lot of measures.
Okay, there's a lot. So
Yeah.
my I guess
Thank you, Gary.
my point is letters of support are helpful. And if you're aware, the nonprofit has a very small margin of survival rate, and we've been around for 12 years. If you want to get on my fundraising committee, we could use that help too, because in order to cover our overhead while we're waiting for funding, we still have to keep the lights on and do all the other things. So we've done lots of pint nights and other fundraisers along the way. So I know that we're friends and we can communicate, and I'd love to have your help on those things too, because that's what this
Yeah.
true.
I do think it's important to point out that originally it was proposed to do construction in 2 phases. So it was going to be upstream first, then the downstream. But at this point, once we get the plan in place, then you'd be going for construction for the whole thing at once.
Yeah.
Which also now includes an upstream section for the Bottom property that wasn't previously included at the suggestion of the agencies. So, but yeah, and then the water and sewer lines would be, lowered to accommodate the design and all that.
Right.
So the good news is, thank you for being understanding of changes. It's not easy. These things are super complicated. Your questions are really important and your support. And the other part of the good news is was mentioned is that there's going to be a much bigger effort happening. So the impact on reducing nuisance flooding is going to be better with this larger project. So those are the good news. The last piece of good news is thanks to DWR's incredible patience and understanding in adjusting this project all the way along. Uh, it's highly likely to get funded sooner than later, simply because there's so much investment that's being made to get it to this place. So, in our experience in doing this kind of work, when the agencies invest this much into getting these designs and everything and permitting done, the likelihood of getting funded for construction is very high. It's not guaranteed, but it's very high. So those are good news pieces, but it's still frustrating. It takes a long time
I
for
have a
this stuff.
question for Carrie. Carrie, do you have a crystal ball about future funding from Department of Water Resources?
Great question. So that measure is really what will fund our future grants. So it's on the ballot currently. I cannot politically advocate for anyone voting for it, but just so you know, that's where it is. And that's what will help our, what we call USRP, the grant that's funding this project right now, be able to fund future projects. And with this grant in good standing, and as long as all of the planning is complete and turned in by June of 2025, you'll stay in good standing to apply for a construction portion of this project.
And my team heard that well. And I want to say right now that Carrie has been an incredible advocate for us and has gone to her supervisors and to the legal offices of DWR and advocated for the Powers Creek project. And we're really fortunate to have her on Zoom today.
I wish you guys could meet her in person. She's a really nice person, and I'm not just saying that so that we can get more funding, but that's it's all true. And she is also a graduate of Cal Poly, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So she's from this area and she's got her heart here too. She's right behind us. So we've got the will and we know the way and we have the ability. So I think we will achieve what we need to. It's just it takes time. Believe me, I would love to have seen this project end on time because I've been raising money for covering the overhead for 10 years now, and it's tiring. And some of my folks here from my board have been involved in that too. They've showed up at a lot of different meetings, a lot of different pint nights and whatnot, and bought a lot of hats. So you can see that. So let's go. I know that there are more questions. Yes, Lynn.
Press the button till you
You'll
see
see
numbers.
on there.
Thank you. I have a couple more requests. I guess they're future requests. It sounds like you're partially through the planning process and resubmitting process, but we would like to be on a list that gets copies of documents that are submitted. If you have a CC list, I suppose different people get copies of those documents. Also, I think I talked to somebody and there's going to be somebody's plant person, maybe your plant person is going to be looking at the types of plants in the creek. Know whatever list they come up with, uh, what are invasives and what are not invasives. And if there is an estimate of how many plants are in either category, we'd like to get that as well. And we would we signed something. We had a meeting with the city. What was that? Before the
Access agreements.
Yeah,
yeah,
it was related to those agreements. Yeah,
correct.
for the survey.
That was
So
for
we don't have a
survey.
copy of those. We would like to get a copy of those that we signed.
Okay. And just to respond immediately, I believe that um, is your team is on the palette?
It's our
Yeah,
botanist.
our botanist is assisting with that, specifically Joseph Saylor, who's been involved in other efforts with Powers Creek. So he'll be working on the revegetation plan, including the planting list. As far as baseline or existing conditions, prior team had a vegetation assessment done of the riparian corridor, I think by the local firm McVeigh. So we do have that document if you'd be interested in
Or was
reviewing.
it, was it Aaron? It
We
was
would like to
Aaron at
get.
Greenway, right? Wasn't it?
Aaron did a landscaping plan. I think you're talking about summer, right? Sunny, I mean, yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
Sunny. Okay.
Yeah, so there was a landscaping plan. The agencies didn't consider it to have enough detail and they wanted more, so that's what we'll be working on. But for doing CEQA, there were several technical studies done. One of them was a vegetation assessment, one was a wildlife assessment, one was a cultural resources investigation. So I have those documents. The cultural resource investigation is confidential because of some of the information in there, but I can provide the vegetation assessment if you'd be interested.
Right, vegetation and wildlife, would those be great?
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank
Thank you.
you, Lynn. And as we're working on documents, the working documents, once they're publishable and reviewed, will be public information, and that's paid for by public funds, so that's going to be available to anyone who wants it. So really good.
Yep.
Pardon me? Yeah, as things come available, you're on my email list, and you're yes, absolutely, yeah.
On the list I think I saw pampas grass, English ivy, and Scotch broom as preferred species for planting.
And eucalyptus, right? Eucalyptus for cover, right?
We'll have to look at that a little closer.
I think that's right. Yeah. Um,
I'm glad we have a knowledgeable group.
so, you ready? Okay. So I'm going to hand the mic to Mike, and he's going to read through this letter with the responses we have collaboratively worked out. So this is a letter that was written by two landowners who cannot be here today, Kit Man, and I'm going to mess up her last name. Someone help me. Rebecca
Zettler.
Zettler. Okay,
Zettler.
thank
Kit
you.
and Rebecca.
Kit and Rebecca.
So again, comments for November 2nd, 2024 Powers Creek Stakeholder Landowner Meeting. Kit Mann and Rebecca Zettler, October 27, 2024. Overall, we're in support of a flood management that is designed to also serve as fish habitat. We are even more supportive when the flood management is designed to support all wildlife in the creek and corridor, something we agree with, shared goals. To that end, we would really like to see the expansion of native trees and dense habitat cover on the city side of the creek to make up for loss of the creek bed. In turn, we'll continue to protect, nurture, and expand habitat on our side as we have been doing for the last 18 years. So again, some of these, I'll try to interject where we're at. We're still premature in terms of where we're at with our planning plan and re-veg plan, all that. So those will be addressed in documents at that 65% stage that gets submitted. And again, we'll work with our regulatory agencies, and they're going to review and comment on that as well. So that's why we do it not at the 100%, at the kind of that draft stage. The 30% is really conceptual. So I know we throw out these percentages, and so for people that aren't in the design world, like what does that mean? Like the 30% is kind of a high level conceptual. 65, it's arbitrary, but you know, that's like the key thing where you really look at that phase of the design, and that's when you really kind of dig into it, and where the agencies will comment, and then that gets us to the 90%. And really at the 90%, the agencies are checking to go, okay, did you address our needs? You know, and then that's really just a tweaking to get to what we call the final, the 100% when you're ready to go. So this next stage is where we really go from a conceptual to what we think the plan's going to look like. So again, a lot of these are not really quite ready to answer yet. Uh, okay, so back to the letter. Please provide written responses to the following questions. We're working on written responses, so we'll get that to Kit and Rebecca. General, number one, it is important for us to know who will be responsible for decision making during each part of the project. Who, what entities is the project lead and ultimately responsible for all parts of the project, including funding and long-term maintenance. So for the planning phases, there are many experts working on the team. We're here. Northern Hydrology, that's Rose and Jeff. SHN, Gary and I are just part of a team that is part of the design team. And then Bottlewatt Watershed Council. So again, Bottlewatt Watershed Council is the lead in partnership with the city of Blue Lake. I want to be clear about that. They secured that, but it was through a partnership with the funding agency that we're able to Blue Lake for this to continue. They did approach the city, and we've worked through that as we explained, and that's how this was able to continue.
And we've been very much working as a cohesive team, and we've got great leadership on the team. And,
Yeah. So Dave is the lead representing, Bottlewatt Watershed for this. DWR are the grant funds are for planning only, and the grant terms end June 2025. So some of this we've gone through with the presentation. Item 1B. Who, what entities will be responsible for securing all necessary environmental permits and ensuring they are met? Bottlewatt Watershed Council is subcontract SHN. So Gary went through, we're taking, SHN's taking the lead of the environmental permits and securing that. So the goal is, again, to have these all submitted by then. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that we'll have the permits in hand, but we will be having, our goal is to get everything submitted, because you do kind of have to have that complete document. As Gary said, we need the 90% phase to submit for some of these permits.
Yeah, for
Yeah, when they
issuance.
issue them is
Yeah.
key. So again, you can't have construction documents or go to construction till your permits are issued. And that'll be part of when we're applying for funding. We'll have to have the permits. Uh, Item 1C, who, what entities will be responsible for project construction? Again, we're not at construction yet. There's no entity identified for the project construction limits at this time. Ideally, if the partnership continues with the city, then we'd work as the construction manager on the project, working, and we do a lot of construction management on water. In fact, we're working with some of that right now. We're partnered with the project Northern Hydrology talked about at Redwood Creek, Prairie Creek, sorry, up at Orc. So we're actually partnered with Northern Hydrology on that project. Again, to be determined. So I don't want to misstate. I want to be clear about that. General question number 2. For any answer that is to be determined, when will the request for proposal process start, and when will the contracts be awarded? Approximate date. I can't answer that because we have to get to securing funding. There's no RFP out right this time. General question number 3, in what specific ways and through what process are our concerns and desires going to make a difference in how this project unfolds? Again, our project team, we continue to have additional meetings and written correspondence, primarily with landowners, but also with greater Blue Lake residents, to take input and address concerns and desires as the project goes. So, again, part of the grant was outreach and meetings was part of the agreement. So this is worked into it. This is one of them. We talked about in January, February, we'll have another meeting after we've got that 65% information and submitted to agencies. We'll share that with.
Well, we're hoping that we get through that process by mid-January. That's an estimate.
Yeah.
And we've been wrong before. So
Probably February.
it could,
Can give you our contact information.
yeah, and for you to reach me is just the alliance. I think it's on this form here but you can reach me also through our website through info.org. So anyone who wants to be part of the next meeting, we're going to survey, and we survey our leadership team here, and we survey the Powers Creek community, which will involve landowners and probably those who also are inquiring about floodplain areas.
Okay, general question 3A. What opportunities will be provided for community input in addition to any required public comment period associated with CEQA and other permitting processes? Barry, not to put you on the spot, but since you're the planner.
So what the question was asking about the accessory
Yeah.
duplex? Okay. So as I noted, conditional use permit will be required, which will require a public hearing before the planning commission, but we are proposing to use an exemption, as I noted, the statutory exemption for restoration projects. So that doesn't necessarily require, the circulation period, public comment period, all those kind of things. So people want to provide comments on sequel would need to do so through basically the hearing process before the planning commission. So if anybody's specifically interested in the CEQA aspect, we can provide you the documentation. I'm going to send you, Lynn, the vegetation assessment and the wildlife report now. But yeah, if anybody wants more information about that statutory exemption, let me know. I can provide that. So.
Okay, general question number 4. Who are the possible funders for project implementation and what are their goals? So again, as we have mentioned, there's 2 potential funders, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Fisheries Restoration Grants Program, which has been referred to as the FRGP grant program. Those projects are to restore, enhance, and protect Andromeda's salmonoid habitat, Andromeda's watershed through implementation or design projects. Projects that consist of watershed scale, larger monitoring efforts on completed effectiveness of projects, and projects that support implementation projects through planning, outreach, or education. So that's Fish and Wildlife. The other potential funding agency is Department of Water Resources.
Can I add a couple more?
Yeah, by all means, please.
State Coast Conservancy is an option. NOAA Fisheries is another option. Possibly U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. NOAA and BWR are the most likely, I would say. The FRGP, very competitive. They reject, they fund about 25% of the proposals that they get. They like to work on wild streams. They don't like urban streams so much. So that one would be a heavy lift, not impossible. They did fund the design. And, I was told in the past, if they fund the design, they'll probably fund the implementation. I've also been told that they don't like working in urban streams where there's a lot of infrastructure to work around. So hard to say, but there's at least 4 funding sources out there.
And I just want to note that each one of these processes of looking for funding, securing the funding, takes many hours to get through the process of getting the proposal together. And we're not covered for that. So I don't know, Don, how many hours did we just spend on the last grant we did, which was easy?
The easy grant, that was like 40 hours.
Yeah.
The hard grants are more like 80.
Yeah, so it's 80 to 100 hours of time that we have to basically go out to the community and pass the hat and ask to cover that expense.
There are also foundations, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and others that might also contribute. So Caltrout, well, they're not a funding entity. They're another nonprofit.
They're like
seeks
Ottawa
funding.
Watershed Council where they're seek funding and administer.
They're our competitor.
Yeah.
Just kidding. In a good way.
You guys work together.
We do.
But for instance, there's also Humboldt Humboldt Area Foundation, HAF.
Yeah.
That actually was ready to buy Blue Lake back in 1983 when it was still a lake. But at any rate, they're also a source, and they've got their Wild Rivers Foundation within that group that might also be a source. So,
General question number 5. What timeline are you anticipating for the implementation phase? As we talked about, we have to finish this phase here by June 2025. Then once we have a complete project, so to speak, then we start seeking funding and what funding cycles hit. So at best would be 2026, a summer, fall 2026, as we said, just at best. And it depends on funding cycles, and there's a lot of things that factor in that. But it does help when you have already invested. A lot of agencies just don't like to fund studies and where they sit on a shelf. They've committed to funding a project based on availability of funds, and they like to follow that and see that through. So yeah, pressure's on us to deliver.
But like you're saying, there's a new measure that we're hoping
Yes.
to pass, which is
for
likely to
Four.
pass.
Yes, on four.
Yes, I already did that. So, but yeah, so there may be then state funding, or very likely.
I want to say that there are still 2 more full pages for
Yeah.
to respond to. So if we can keep
Yeah.
our comments short
We
to
got
the
a lot.
point and keep moving.
Question number 6, what assurances can you give us that this project will be completed as planned and not abandoned before replanting due to lack of funds or other reasons? So I think the key thing here is this is just the planning phase. So the next phase would be the construction phase, which also has the replanting. All that funding is all part of that. When you do these public works types projects, there's bonds that are put up too. For the contractor, for blocks, or again, that's why you have bonding in place. That the whole point of that is then there is money to see that the project is completed if something were to happen on the contractor side. So I guess that's all I can speak to in terms of guarantees.
Clear, but that's not Ottawa Watershed Council.
No, no, it's a contractor. Yeah.
We hire with
Yeah.
the bond. And I'm not sure if that's standard. I've never actually required a bond from a contractor that I've used.
We do for our public work, like our public type projects. We do just again for the risk when there's more money, like a bigger project.
Yeah.
We typically in our contract documents we ask bonds, and again it factors in. I mean, the contractor factors that into their bid price.
Yeah.
Because there's money that
I was curious
to secure a bond.
What a bond costs.
No, and it's not cheap.
Again,
It.
$1 million project.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're only paying a small percentage,
Yeah.
obviously, getting a company to back you with the
But those are contingencies that you put in place.
Yeah.
And again, it's hard to talk about these things when you don't even have a project out that's ready to construct yet. So, general question 7, what contingency plans do you anticipate following if construction takes longer than you anticipated and the project is forced to go through a winter partially completed? So again, I can't really answer that. So what I believe the question is saying, what contingencies do we have if you only get partway through restoration and you have to stop for winter? And what do you have in place? And I can't really speak to that till we know the full extent of our plan, how much grading that was going to be required, the full extent of that. Can we achieve it in one season or not? Until we define a project, then we can go into, do we bid this in 1 phase or 2 phase? Conceptually, we're looking at 1 phase. I don't know, Rose or Jeff, if you want to.
This is 2 or 3 year project.
Yeah. Okay. So again, yeah, and I won't know till we have a plan. I can't really comment on that.
You can only have a 2 or 3 month work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of it. That's the
Yeah.
So ideally downstream up, right? Yeah. And so again, I can't.
3 phases probably.
Just
It's always winterization requirements on
Yeah.
the contract regardless. So no
Yeah.
matter the requirements to button things up by a certain date, like September 15th or October 15th, whatever it might be for various
And what BMPs.
practices, mulching and things like that.
So when we're talking about, maybe to help explain when we talk about phases and downstream up, is you would focus on what's achievable in our construction window. That would include the revegetation and the planting plan. Like it would be the complete amount of work, not just let's just grade this part or grade the whole thing. So again, once we get to a final plan, we can really look at with our experience and understanding of construction and construction seasons, what's reasonable to break this up. And then not only do they have the re-veg plan, but there's also what's called a stormwater pollution prevention plan. Any large construction project has to have, and those BMP. So you guys see it along highway projects. You're going to see straw or wattles, or you just see a lot of stuff that's in place temporarily. And again, we haven't even laid any of that out yet, but there'll be plans that go with the construction documents that this is going to be part of the requirements.
And that is a permitting requirement too, like the
Yeah.
stream bed alteration agreement, they will tell you you have to be done by October 15th, but if the weather's still good, as long as you have the ability to button up, as Snow mentioned, 24 hours. Or
Yeah.
24 or 48 hours.
Yeah.
So that means you have to have your straw wattles, your straw mulch on site, ready to go. And if that's in the forecast, then you shut down construction and you get it ready for the rain. So that's a permit requirement.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that would be in basically all the permits. You
Yeah.
know, it'd be in the water board permit, the CFW permit, the Army Corps permit. In addition, I mean, the city's grading regulations also have erosion and sediment control standards that have to be followed. So there's multiple levels of regulation that require that.
General question number 8, what members of the project team will continuously supervise on site with detailed knowledge of the plan, a current and accurate map of property lines, the necessary GPS equipment and training to check property lines in the field, and the authority to pause or modify the day's work if necessary to address unforeseen circumstances or concerns, regardless of lost time or cost? So again, when you get to an actual construction project like this, there's called construction staking. They have the limits of construction that all gets graded out. You know, that's with a surveyor lines all that out. You know, the work we're doing now is defining the property lines. We're defining all that right now. So they'll be on the plans, but also part of the construction is a construction staking. Any sensitive habitat that has to be identified and flagged and also identified. So there's a lot of things that go into these plans once we have them completed to identify uh, constraints, which again, property lines or sensitive habitat. And then you also have a construction manager that's overseeing that. There's like weekly meetings that occur. There's check-ins. So there's people on site depending on the funding source and the amount of funding available. Is it a full-time construction manager? So these are all things that get identified once you get to the construction plans and the grant application. So again, premature right now to identify who that is, but those are traditionally the strategies to implement a construction project.
Appreciate everyone's patience. We have 2 more pages.
Yeah, 2 more pages.
Make a suggestion.
Yeah.
Because we're gonna go until like midnight.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm going to respond to them in writing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
All right.
we're trying to honor the
Yeah.
we're trying to honor the community members who are here and staying here.
Yeah.
But it seems like we
It's
need
a
to
long
get
letter.
through this, and to respect Kit and Rebecca, I think we should just read through it. If you have questions that is really, really burning, hold on to it, and I will stay at the end.
Yeah. I got 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, it's a lot.
We have walked the length of the creek from the footbridge past the city's old dump site. There are several places between transects where overflow shoulders already exist. Simple extrapolations from the transect to transects are likely to discount or entirely miss these existing and potentially desirable naturally formed hydraulic features. A longitudinal survey should be performed to improve the modeling by including these desirable features where existing topography would largely achieve the desired conditions, leave it in place and work with it. Next topic, vegetation removal. In broad terms, we understand that a central channel will be cut for typical winter water flow and then shoulders cleared for overflow flood management. In the process of doing this, significant damage will be done to the wildlife corridor for all wildlife inhabitants of the creek. Question 1 related to vegetation removal. Will that be wholesale, large machine clear cut of thicket, brambles, shrubs, and trees? Vegetation removal question 2. What about existing desirable native trees, bay, redwood, willow, alder? What process will be used and who will be responsible for recording an inventory of removed or incidentally killed trees in order to meet replanting requirements? Question 3 related to veg. Will field fitting be incorporated during construction to ensure that certain trees can be preserved? Question 4. Who makes the decisions about what vegetation is removed and what should be saved? Question 5. Can adjacent landowners have input on this? Question 6. In what ways can landowner preferences be incorporated into this process? Making sure I'm reading right now. Okay. Revegetating. Our experiences with the promises of revegetating the landscape is poor. The original development plans for the industrial park included planned and managed vegetation on city property to serve as a buffer between the industrial park and residential areas. Nearly 40 years ago, we participated in planting hundreds of trees along the trail on behalf of the city. Approximately 15 years ago, the surviving trees were removed by a watershed nonprofit without consultation or
That wasn't us.
consideration of the original plans and the promise of that they would be replaced with native trees. Nothing was ever replanted. That is unfortunate. Our team is planning a native riparian planting palette. Okay, thinking, no, this is there. That is unfortunate. Our team is planning a native riparian planting palette that is complementary to all parties' goals. These include Powers Creek landowners, City of Blue Lake, and funding agencies. Revegetating, question 1. Where does the funding come from for the revegetation phase of the project? Question 2. Once vegetation. Question 3. Oh, I'm sorry, no. Question 2. What would the sub 2A? What would be what constitutes success and over what time period will it be measured? All right. So vegetation removal plan 3. With consideration of specific permitting for the project, what will be the vegetation replacement ratios and survival requirements and consequent replanting if needed? And question 4, who will support, maintain the initial plantings with watering, deer fencing, and other requirements? And then for material movement, which means, the excavation or the soil it's removed. We read on the Ottawa Watershed Council website, the project includes the excavation and removal of approximately 2,300 or 23,000 cubic yards of sediment.
I want to note that's not on our website.
And that was a previous plan. That's not a recent plan, but we don't know what that volume is. Anyway, back to reading. That's a lot, something like 2,000 10-yard truckloads moved out. This is the primary reason we needed better survey data. Okay. What kind of size equipment will be used in this work? Oh, so for material movement, question 1, what kind and size of equipment will be used in this work? Question 2, what will you get into the creek to remove such much material? What ingress and egress routes will you take? And question 3, where will excavated materials go? What haul routes will you take? And then for maintenance, in the past, there's not been much city maintenance of the creek. Question 1, with the proposed significant intervention, who will be handling ongoing maintenance in the future? Question 2, who will be funding long-term maintenance of the creek bed? Question 3, how will maintenance be supervised? And then final notes. In general, disturb existing conditions as little as possible. Do not bulldoze an area just to rebuild it. The same, do not remove all vegetation when some of it is appropriate and can be left in place. Be careful with conservation in mind. Recognize and prioritize maintaining habitat in the wildlife corridor. This will require maintaining mature cover vegetation on both sides of the creek. We'd like to see the whole city side south of the creek to be green screened densely to promote and protect the return of all wildlife to this corridor. Nothing to expose, allow, or tolerate humans into the creek. The existing cuts have already exposed landowners to trespassers looking for a shortcut to the creek. In addition, over the years, there has always been evidence of encampments in the creek during the 6 or more months the creek is dry. How are you going to address the movement of people in the creek long term? Since the project will largely remove current vegetation screening for adjacent landowners, other protections must be added, including fencing or fencing as needed. damage to our property with the transacts revealed the communication and oversight were lacking. We'd like a bond up for reparation to private property should more damage occur the next phase of the project. Do not conflate this project with some concept of beautification or walking path improvements that have been suggested in the past. We will strongly and proactively oppose any attempts at lighting or paving. Keep it natural. Keeping light, noise, drones, and motorized vehicles off the south side of the creek gives wildlife peace and protection from human encroachment. Stop clearing brush, limbing, and cutting down trees along the trail for beautification. Make work for community service work, etc. Let's see. In some emails and letters where is this is proof. Anyway, I think I got. Yeah, let us reinforce that BWC and the city of Blue Lake do not have permission to access our property either from our property side of cities. It is possible that at some point in the future, permission be granted on case-by-case basis with owners present. Some emails, letters, meetings. This also is referred to as a community meeting. However, only adjacent property owners have been invited, and there have been no community-wide notifications. Will be well-noticed community-wide meeting in the future. I think that is the end of the letter.
Okay, and just to address that last part, the initial goals of this meeting were to meet with the landowners of the Powers Creek landowner community, not the greater community. That was the focus of this meeting.
Yeah.
The next meeting, due to the interest of people that are in the floodplain, we'll broaden our approach. And that was, I think, a tactical process that we went through to ensure that we didn't allow the meeting to go too far out of scope. And that can always be a challenge. So thank you, Mike, for reading the comments of Kitten and Rebecca, who were not able to be here today. And for the public, other members that are here today, we will have a report from this meeting. The report will include our response to each one of those points, and it will include the recordings from this recorded portion of the session, as well as anything that we noted in the field tour that needs to be addressed. I think Sonome brought up the maybe possibly getting some fencing or something for the property owners on the north side of Rivers Creek. So those are things that I wanted to document for now. We have about 10 more minutes before the end of the meeting. I want to open it to more Q&A. So anyone can ask questions, or if you'd like to say yes. Supervisor Madrone.
Well, I think it is really awesome that Kit and Rebecca took the time to write out all those details. I suspect that Lynn and David agree with a lot of that detail, if not all of it as well. To get to that detail, we got to finish the 65% plans. I think hopefully everybody understands that we're up against a tight timeline. We've been very lucky to have a DWR staff that have been very helpful and considerate in terms of all the adjustments that have had to be made here. But I hope that we can all move forward with getting that 65% done timely. Obviously, no entry into Kit and Rebecca's property or David or Lynn's without their specific permission for additional access issues. But as long as we can maintain that, hopefully mitigate some of the things that have already happened and get the team just fully going forward to get this done, that is what's going to get us to the place of being able to reduce this nuisance flooding and answer all these incredibly important questions about revegetation and wildlife and the rest of it. So I hope that we're all on the same page there. I really appreciate the effort by the Bottawa Watershed Council in trying to bring us all together to do this. I mean, Powers Creek, the very first project that I mentioned about replacing the double culverts with a bridge was a DWR Urban Stream Restoration Grant Program. And is it Carrie online? Carrie, you follow in the footsteps of some great people like Ann Riley, Dr. Ann Riley, who is the creator of the Urban Stream Restoration Grant Program when she worked at DWR back in the 1980s. And she's written books on restoring streams in cities. These are some of the more complicated projects that one can do because you've got this urban interface. And, you know, when we're doing revegetation out in the middle of the hills, nobody asks this level of detail of questions because it's just not there. But this is, I've always felt that this urban stream restoration is some of the most important work that we do While it may not produce as many fish per se as something like the Klamath River Dam removal or other really big watershed projects, the cultural change, the educational opportunities that occur with urban stream restoration, because everybody sees it, everybody feels it, they are so incredible. So, Carrie, thank you for your work with Badawat on this, and thank you everybody here today for coming and participating. And I hope that we can move forward and get this thing done.
And I want to thank Supervisor Madrone for being here today, Steve Madrone. I want to thank my board members who showed up today, Stephen Allen, Linda Miller, and Rose Jonathan. And I want to thank some of my mentors, Don Allen, who's been here, Steve Madrone, and my team. I couldn't ask for a better team to work on this. And I really appreciate the two landowners who showed up today, as well as the letter that we had that's going to help us dial in and focus on what we need to do to ensure to the community that we're doing it the way that it needs to be done for everyone. So I appreciate that. Um, Rose, my board member here, is a WSP Watershed Stewards leader, and she is going to be working with the school in Blue Lake, which I believe is a K-8 school, right?
Yep.
K-8. And really, this project is for them. And Rose will be taking them around and showing them in the future the changes that occur and where the fish are. And really, what we're doing here today isn't about us, it's about them. So I want us to keep our eyes on that prize, and we can work out these details and get along. Okay, is that wrap?
So,
Okay, time to go to the logger.
I also want to say I'm going to go as soon as I get home. I'm going to put this School Creek culvert at the Patriot on the list with Public Works to really keep a high priority looking at that and working towards securing the funding to deal with that, because that's been a problem for a long time. And great, thank you very much. Yeah, yeah.
like
We
that.
don't need to compound our problems down
I'm
here.
so glad you're here today. Thanks for being here. Thanks, everybody. All right. That's a wrap. Thank you. All right.